We're glad you chose to join us today, either by Zoom or by phone. We've used Zoom for prior meetings as we present information to you since we aren't able to meet in person. A YouTube link will be provided and a survey will be sent to you after the meeting. The PAR Safe Streets staff joining us today are Michelle Voth, Executive Director, Prevention and Resiliency Services, Lynn Smith, Community Prevention Consultant, Dana Swartz, Licensed Addiction Counselor, Irene Caballero, Stock Grant Coordinator and Bilingual Community Mobilizer, Michaela Butterworth, Education and Communication Specialist, and I'm Judy Wilson, Office Manager and National Night Out Program Coordinator. Please contact any of us by email if you have questions or if we can be of service to you. The agenda for the day is published for your information. At each meeting, we usually recognize a champion of character. A person can be nominated for exhibiting good character that has significantly improved the health, safety, or quality of life of the community. Any of the 49 qualities can be considered for a champion of character. Anyone in Shawnee County can be nominated by completing the nomination form and emailing it to jwilson@safestreets.org. So if you want to reach out to me at my email, I'll be glad to forward the form to you. The September minutes are shown and they were emailed to everyone. So this is just for your information and it will be included in the YouTube that you'll receive after the meeting. No action is required for the minutes. Our staff update today for September includes neighborhood watch meetings. Since we're not able to meet in person, safety information is emailed to each neighborhood. This month, safety information was emailed to 140 neighborhoods and about 2,100 people were reached. There were 363 emails and calls for service, even though we aren't in the office full time. A town hall meeting was held by Zoom and YouTube with 156 people reached. Please check out the Facebook, LIRI Facebook, which is Lock It, Remove It, or Lose It, the NNO Facebook, and Safe Streets Coalition Facebook, and share the information with others that you see there. On the substance abuse initiatives, a sellers and service training was held, and the sticker shock information was made to liquor stores. You may want to check the Prevention Recovery Services Facebook for updated information, including meetings and trainings. And on the Latino initiatives, there were 3 presentations in Spanish by Zoom. The Latino Facebook reached 3,901 people. Today, we have Sergeant Michael Burns with us from the Topeka Police Department to present our crime stats.
Thanks, Judy. I'm Sergeant Burns for the community policing here at Topeka Police Department. Going over the city violent crime, homicides are up this year compared to last year. Business robberies are down, and I do want to point out one thing for your aggravated assaults and aggravated batteries. We did see a little bit increase for domestic violence related aggravated assaults and batteries. About 30% of all cases being reported to us are in a domestic violence situation. So if you do find yourself into a heated argument, with a loved one, a family member, a roommate, a dating relationship, do what you can to alleviate the propensity for it to turn violent. If you have to call us before having to take somebody to jail due to state laws involving domestic violence, but make sure you have multiple layers of relief in case you find yourself into a heated argument for whatever reason that may be. City property crime, we do have burglary to businesses are up and burglary to residences are down. Those are correlate with what we have been seeing all summer long with COVID. The residences are down because the viewpoint of a lot of people is that more people are working from home and more people may be temporarily unemployed due to COVID concerns. So With the burglary to the businesses up on the other side of that, criminals are anticipating some businesses not being open, hours changed, and therefore the opportunity for the crime is presented. A little bit about auto thefts. I know we talked about it a little bit. It continues to be a problem here in 2020 for the city. We're on pace to be around 1,000 vehicles stolen for the city, which is higher than usual. We've had a couple cases, including this morning, of people leaving their cars running unattended, whether it's to go into the quick shop to get something to drink, whether it's to warm the car up before they go into work. As the temperatures dip and the lighted hours start to diminish, this creates a opportunity for criminals to look at vehicles that are running unattended and can easily get into the driver's seat and drive off in a matter of seconds. People are watching, or criminals are watching, especially when it gets colder, the exhaust coming from your tailpipes, if anybody's in the area. And of course, the lighting hours being diminished creates some sort of coverability for them to make that opportunity for the crime. And then there are a couple events this month that the Topeka Police Department is assisting with on October 24th, which is a Saturday. We will be partnering with Sam's Club at 1401 Southwest Wanamaker, as well as Walmart North, 2600 Southwest Rochester, for DEA drug takeback. We partnered with them last year as well. It turned out to be a good event. This is an opportunity for citizens in between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. to drop off any old medication, prescribed medication. No questions asked, you just drop it off. We handle it. The DEA will then come in for a couple days later to take that off our hands and then destroy it. The two caveats of that is we are not accepting any illegal street narcotics, and no needles, just because we do not have a dispense opportunity or bin to get rid of those and take those safely. So any prescription meds that you have laying around the house, family members, let them know. Again, that's going to be Sam's Club on Wanamaker, Walmart North off Highway 24, in between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. on October 24th. And then the following weekend, October 31st, of course, is Halloween. That's also on a Saturday. The city will be hosting the 5th annual Trunk or Treat, which is going to be Hummer Sports Park, 2751 Southwest East Circle Drive here in Topeka. If you go on the Topeka Police Department's Facebook page, there are additional details on there, such as the route that participants wanting to go through the trunk or treat area. That route is on the additional details on our Facebook page. It is a drive-through event, so in years past, of course, you came out downtown and walked through the event, shook hands, took pictures, and had a great time. Unfortunately, due to COVID reasons, this is going to be a drive-through event where you're going to remain in your vehicle. Still going to be a lot of fun. You're still going to see the same old faces out there. It's just going to be operated a little bit differently. So additional details, like I said, are on the Topeka Police Department. The hours of the event are 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., again, held at Hummer Sports Park parking lot. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Mike. Next, we have Deputy Abigail Christian, Shawnee County Sheriff's Office Public Relations Deputy, and she'll give an update on the Shawnee County Sheriff's Office.
All right, thanks, Judy, appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Judy said, I'm Abigail Christian, the Sheriff's Office's Public Relations Deputy. I'll be speaking on behalf of Sheriff Hill today. Just like my friend over at the Topeka Police Department just mentioned, if you want to go to our first slide, you can see a little bit more about the trunk or treat. Like he said, tune into our social media pages for more information. Again, Saturday, October 31st. I won't repeat everything he said, but it's going to be a great time, and we do have a lot of safety measures in place to keep everyone safe with COVID still going on. And we just want to say a big shout out to Mars Wrigley, Frito-Lay, and Hummer Sports Park for their donations this year to help make this event take place again, especially with everything going on. So go to our social media and check that out, and we look forward to seeing you guys. That next slide. The Sheriff's Office has been super active in the last month. We've made several felony drug arrests involving methamphetamine, multiple burglary arrests with a couple people that were actively burglarizing at the time of their arrest, and a couple sexual exploitation of children arrests. So we are being as proactive as possible, getting as many people out there working the road as we can. We appreciate tips that are coming in to either us or anonymously, so keep that up, community. We would like to thank our fellow law enforcement agencies that have assisted us recently, and we do look forward to continuing to work with them in the future. Again, we encourage our citizens, report any suspicious activities, any suspicious people. You can call us, keep it anonymous, that's fine. And we do have several new initiatives and community outreach programs in the works, so stay tuned to our social media for more information on that. And if you'll go to that last slide, it's going to show you all of our social media and our websites. That way you can keep in touch with us. As always, we'll continue to serve and protect our citizens and ensure the safety and security of our community. Our highest priority is to keep the people and property of Shawnee County out of harm's way. So thank you guys for your time today, and please contact us with any questions.
Thank you, Abigail. Michelle Voth, Executive Director of Shawnee Regional Prevention and Resiliency Services, will introduce Shawnee County District Attorney Mike Kagay, presenting the domestic violence.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, and I'm excited and appreciative of Mike Kagay to be here today to talk about domestic violence and substance abuse. A little bit about Mike. I'm learning more as we go along, but Mike took office as Shawnee County DA in January of 2017. And prior to that, he was a elected district attorney. He served at the Shawnee County DA's office as an assistant DA, where he prosecuted cases involving a whole host of different kinds of offenses, including juvenile and child in need of care cases, child exploitation and abuse, drug distribution, property offenses, violent offenses, sex offenses, and homicide. So he has a broad brush experience with all kinds of different law enforcement issues. He's also, as district attorney, has targeted prosecution of violent crimes, sex crimes, and crimes against children. Very committed to community outreach and partnerships, and is involved in various law enforcement focused boards and organizations as well. Mike graduated from Washburn with a degree in English. He got his doctorate degree, or Juris Doctorate degree, from University of Washburn University School of Law, and with a goal of really becoming a prosecutor. So he was able to achieve that goal, and has been able to really pursue his passion of protecting the innocent and being a voice for victims and seeking justice. Mike's got a couple of kids, wife Hannah, and is proud to call Shawnee County his home. And Mike, we're very appreciative of having you come in and really speak to this very important issue today. So welcome.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for your kind introduction. The only thing I would add is I do have 5 children. So
didn't see that.
More than a couple. It's not listed on there, so you wouldn't know that otherwise. But thank you very much. And thank you, Judy and Safe Streets, for the invitation to be here today. Domestic violence is such an important issue, not just in our community, but really anywhere, where families are. And October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So I'm going to talk about domestic violence and the effects, the compounding effects that substance abuse, both alcohol and drugs, can have on that problem. Okay, so domestic violence. How do we typically see this? Well, the law defines domestic violence, and it lays out all the criteria for it to qualify underneath the domestic violence statute. So as a practical matter, in my office, when we're dealing with these issues, we're typically, can we go back a slide? I'm sorry. Thank you. We're typically dealing with partners in a current relationship. So whether it's a husband or a wife, a boyfriend, girlfriend situation. And sometimes we see a former girlfriend, former boyfriend, an estranged spouse, something like that, that is engaging in stalking type behaviors that lead to domestic violence. And when these partners have children in common, certainly there's a connection there that brings them back together, and we see that. We'll talk more about those issues as this goes on. But we've also seen cases where, I can recall one specifically that I handled where a son was struggling with methamphetamine addiction, and he was physically attacking his father. Now, the son was not a minor, he was an adult, but he was living at home, and the father was physically, he was much larger than his son. And he told me when he came in for the case that he really just wanted to see his son get treatment. He really just wanted to see his son get the help that he needed. He was not concerned for his safety, and he understood this was not his son, or at least this was not who he believed his son to be. And he thought that the methamphetamine had an adverse impact on him and driven him to those violent behaviors. So those are some examples of domestic violence that we see in the office. Next slide, please. So this is the power and control wheel. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with it. What this does for us is it kind of lays out the pattern of abuse. And you can see power and control at the center of the wheel. And the key thing here is that the perpetrator, the offender, will systematically use threats and intimidation and coercion. And these are all designed to frighten the partner, to instill fear in the partner. So those are the spokes of the wheel, those behaviors. And then the thing that holds it all together, as you'll see on the outside, is the physical and sexual violence. So what are some of the methods that are used here? Dominance, the need to be in control, to exert dominance over your partner. Abusive individuals need to feel like they're in control, they're in charge of the relationship. So they're going to make all the decisions, in the relationship, and if the family's involved, all the decisions for the family. They sometimes want to tell you or tell the partner every specific thing to do, and don't want that to be questioned or challenged in any way. The abuser may end up treating their partner like a servant, or even as something that they own. And I'll use a specific example, not as a prosecutor, but as just as a person. I remember hearing a man speak to his wife, and it was on speakerphone, and this was shocking to me. She was asking for permission to buy specific groceries, and he was telling her exactly what to buy and what not to buy, even down to the brand and the size, and she was asking for his approval to do that. And I did not get the impression that this was a money problem. This was not a poverty issue and they were trying to cut costs. This was a control issue. Now, if you're like me, your wife doesn't even trust you to go to the store and do the shopping. So, she'll do the grocery shopping for the family. And when I go, I usually, I get a list. So that's one example of how to dominate or how a partner might be dominant in a relationship. Humiliation is something else that abusers will do. They will, whether it's name calling or insults, anything that they can do to attack their partner's self-esteem and make them feel like they have no value to anyone, that no one else would want to be with them. And they do this in private, they can do this in public. And the whole point is to make the partner feel powerless. Isolation is another tactic. Anything that sends a message to the partner that they have to rely on their abuser. And we'll talk about later why that's so important and how it plays into why victims of domestic violence sometimes are hesitant to leave. Because an abusive partner wants to isolate and cut off their victim from the outside world. Might keep them from seeing family and friends, might regulate where they can go and when they can go there. I had a conversation with a victim last year who had gotten out of her relationship, and she shared that she was allowed to go to work and she was allowed to go home, and that was it. And her abuser usually drove her back and forth just so that he could have that control. He didn't trust her to just go and drive a car and go to work and come back. And if she deviated from that at all, the response was going to be violence. Threats of violence can be very effective for the abuser to help control their victim. And we see this in criminal cases quite often where, the victim has had enough, or the victim feels like they are in danger of, serious bodily harm or worse. And so they actually call law enforcement and make a report, and police come out and, they record the interview on their Axon cameras and they document everything, and then they send it to our office and we file charges. And then we get contacted by, by the victim, and they say, well, it didn't really happen that way, or I don't want to move forward. And there's a lot of reasons why that could happen. But one of the reasons we have that we know about is that sometimes they are being threatened. If you don't drop the charges, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to hurt you this way, or, whatever it is. And when we get evidence of those threats, that's actually something we use in the case to file additional charges. In addition to that, I would say intimidation is a common tactic, and it's geared towards, just asserting that dominance and making sure that they're in control, that the victim is submissive to them. That could be a look, a glaring look. That could be a gesture of some kind, something that seems aggressive, or breaking things. We've seen that, breaking doors, breaking walls, smashing objects, especially if it's the victim's property. We've seen that too. And the whole idea being, if you don't comply, if you don't give me what I want, then this is going to happen to you. And then I would say the final tactic we see is denying and assigning blame. So the abuser, when confronted with the nature of their behavior, will simply deny that happened. And if they have to admit that some of it did happen, then they assign blame to the victim and say, well, I only did that because you did this. So it was responsive, to something you did. You set me off, or, you didn't have the house clean, or, you didn't come straight back when I told you to, whatever it is. And so they're constantly reassigning that blame and reinforcing, again, their dominance in the relationship. Next slide, please. So to distinguish here between domestic violence, which can include, again, like a father and a son, or, I recall a case where a son was attacking his grandmother and his grandfather. So those would all fall within domestic violence, but when most people hear domestic violence, they're probably thinking of what we call interpersonal relationship violence. So, again, people in a romantic relationship at some point, a dating relationship, or maybe they're married, or they were married at some point. So you can see here the distinction in the numbers. Okay, so these numbers are important, right? Because if you think about the women and girls in your life, statistically, we believe, based on national studies, that 1 in 3 of them are going to be victims or already victims of domestic violence. So that's why this is such an important issue. And that's, honestly, that's why October should be Domestic Violence Awareness Month, because this is something that really permeates all segments of our society. It's not, localized to communities struggling with poverty or anything like that. It's something that kind of like a virus. It's how we're all shut down and we all have these issues and we're all wearing these masks now because of the virus. It's kind of, domestic violence is kind of that way. It's kind of like a virus. It doesn't care who you are. It's going to spread. So you see some numbers there, and it's important to note that this isn't just let's protect our victims and let's make sure that they're okay. But these are victims now, right? The women who are being abused, and sometimes men who are being abused, these are your victims of today, but your victims of tomorrow are actually the children in those relationships, the children who are, I would say, the victims and abusers. Because if a child witnesses domestic violence in their home when they're growing up, they're much more likely to become abusers or to become victims themselves down the road. And this is something that, comes up in a domestic case where I recall when I was prosecuting, 6-7 years ago, and this lady told me that she was going to stay in the relationship because the abuser was her primary source of income. And because, he was a good guy, it was just, when he's drinking, he would be this way. And she would not stay if he had ever touched her son. And I explained to her, he's already harmed your son by physically hurting you and by abusing you in other ways in front of him. That is something your son will have to contend with when he gets older. And it was clear she had never even considered that as a possibility, because he was always nice to her son. So she wasn't worried about her son. And that really changed the way she saw the relationship. Next slide, please. So again, we have some numbers here talking about the age ranges, and you can read these. Next slide, please. Okay, so going back to why victims don't leave, I would say, there's the 8 most common reasons here, but the main reasons that we hear are we have kids together, so we're going to stay together for the kids. Like I just use that example of the victim, talking about her son, but also the financial dependence on the abuser. So as we remember from the power and control wheel, the domestic abuser is constantly working and trying to isolate the victim and make the victim entirely dependent on the abuser. And this is a reason why, it's a means of control. So even if the victim has her own source of income, the abuser will control that income. The abuser will just, they'll have access to everything. The victim won't have any independence or say in that. And so they reinforce this idea that they need the abuser. And obviously it's a lie, but that's how they maintain the control of that relationship. Next slide, please. Okay, so now talking about substance abuse and how this plays in. I don't believe that substance abuse causes domestic violence. And the reason I say that is because, it's something that we hear from victims. Well, he's only this way when he's drinking. He's only this way when he's high. I believe that it might be, it's definitely a factor. You can see how when we go through these numbers, it exacerbates the situation. It might make it more frequent. It might make the offender more violent, more dangerous. But really, the substance abuse itself is not the underlying issue which causes the offender to be violent or to engage in this pattern of behavior. You can see locally, sorry, can we go back? Thank you. So locally, about half of our victims in these cases are requesting the drug and alcohol treatment are included as a condition of the defendant's sentence. And again, it's because they are attributing this behavior to the abuse of those substances. And we'll talk about some numbers here in a minute. But again, it's my belief that substance abuse is not the trigger, just a compounding factor. So let's talk about how the interplay happens. When you're talking about substance abuse, whether it's alcohol or drugs, there's a loss of control function that comes into play, and the abuser tends to lose control of their actions and tends to be more violent. Disinhibition, their feelings may be suppressed, and their anger is just kind of free to run wild. Their decision making becomes poor, obviously, so their judgment is impaired. Next slide, please. So as we're talking about loss of control, and then because their judgment is impaired, even with negative consequences, they're going to continue in their abusive behavior. And what do we know about addiction? Whether it's drug addiction or whether it's alcoholism, we know addiction is a disease that ultimately can completely dominate and take over the person who is struggling with it, right? The addict themselves, they're sick and they're harming themselves, and they may also be harming directly and indirectly harming their loved ones, and that's how we see borne out in a domestic violence situation. And of course, those addictions tend to worsen over time. They become more severe, and so also the abuse can escalate over time. And that's something else that we see pretty frequently. What might start out as a simple argument and maybe somebody psychological and emotional abuse that we were talking about earlier can escalate into pushing, shoving, holding them down, ultimately, punches being thrown, kicking, and strangulation. And when we get to strangulation, certainly, we're talking about things that can actually kill people. So, they do tend to escalate over time. I'm hard pressed to consider a defendant that I've encountered that kind of maintained a, kind of a status quo approach to their level of abuse. Next slide, please. So all these things interplay, not just the substance abuse itself, but you can imagine an addict or an alcoholic causing financial difficulties, right? Within the family dynamic or within that relationship, dropping the ball when it comes to taking care of the kids, not holding up their end of the deal there. Maybe they're a methamphetamine addict and they spend a lot of time around other methamphetamine addicts and engage in infidelity there. And anything that can compound the issues that are already facing the relationship, right? Relationships, they take work on both sides. They take really an equal investment for the most successful relationships. And when you have a partner involved who is abusive and addicted to substances and just engaging in all this other types of behaviors, certainly the relationship is not going to go well. Next slide, please. So here's the other side of it. The substance abuse is not limited to the offender, okay? It just isn't. Sometimes abusing a substance might be used as a coping mechanism by the victim. And you can see some numbers here. I can tell you guys that after a traumatic event, women are twice as likely to develop PTSD. And they may very well use those substances that we're talking about to manage the traumatic effects of that abuse. Next slide, please. So what are we doing here in Shawnee County? I think these numbers are pretty interesting. So we have a batterers intervention program, and when appropriate, that is ordered by the court as a condition of the offender sentence. But we also have a diversion program that we run through our office, and we require batterers intervention in most of our domestic cases. And you can see, based on some numbers here, looks like 79% of the time, someone who completes that program does not reoffend. So it's a very successful program, and that's a very good rate of return, as opposed to the drug and alcohol treatment for this same group. For people who just have drug and alcohol treatment, but not batterers intervention, 70% of them are reoffending. And you can see there, 70 to 80% are just dropping out of treatment. So drug and alcohol treatment is important, certainly on this issue, but things like behavioral therapy and the batterers intervention program, we believe, just based on these numbers, are much more effective in reducing offender recidivism. Next slide, please. So of course, costs are always a concern. They remain a concern for anyone who wants to participate in these programs. And then, the complicating factors that we discussed earlier, the victim, comes into these situations full of trauma, and sometimes with their own substance abuse issues. And maybe they have, maybe both the offender and the victim have experienced, what they call ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, because we know that when you have those, they dramatically increase the risk for mental health issues and substance abuse issues as an adult. I would say not everyone who experiences trauma across their lifetime will experience domestic violence. And not all survivors of domestic violence have had ACEs, have had those childhood experiences. And while I think it's important to recognize that those childhood traumatic events can have an impact on this issue, I think there's a danger in using that as kind of a shield for the offender to say, well, I witnessed this when I was a kid, and I was abused when I was a kid. I think the numbers are 1 in 3 children who experience that type of abuse will go on to become abusers themselves. And so clearly, if 1 in 3 are doing it, that means 2 out of 3 are not doing it. So is it a factor? Does it put them more at risk? Yes, absolutely. But it is not an excuse. It is not a defense to that issue in any way, shape, or form. So I think that wraps us up. I'm happy to take any questions.
DA, I sure appreciate your perspective and the level of detail that you have, and I know that translates into some very good policies in your office. And I just want to thank you for the amount of thought that went into that and your work each day. Especially agree with the batterers intervention program comments. That is a different kind of treatment than substance abuse recovery, and I really appreciate your perspective on that. We really need those programs out there.
Well, thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. And since you offered to speak up here, I might I might ask for your understanding, but you're an expert in these areas. Would you agree with that assessment in dealing with offenders who engage in domestic violence, that behavioral therapy is much more effective?
I'm surrounded by pretty knowledgeable people here at Vallejo, so I'd sure defer to them, but I didn't hear anything in your presentation that I had substantive disagreement with. You know, of course, you've all heard me say I was raised by a cop, you know, Kansas highway patrolman. He was a tough guy, and there is right and there is wrong, according to Dad. And so I grew up with that. But, you know, I also appreciate the business that I've been in for way more than 40 years. And there's a lot of gray out there. And I do think people need to be held accountable. But just like the work I'm doing on the Criminal Justice Reform Commission for the state of Kansas, and DA, I know you're plugged into that as well. But, you know, there's got to be consideration of the disease, your reference to those as diseases. And further might comment, those are diseases of emotion and motivation. And, you know, while those need to be treated and hopefully prevented and followed, you know, people can't use that as an excuse. You know, for bad behavior. And there are causes of bad behavior. There are root causes. And I think there are root causes of addiction. And so when you say that addiction, you know, may not be the cause, you know, that is, that like you say, it does cause for the addiction. I think we need to address in our society. But I think dealing with the behaviors through these cognitive programs are great. And so I hope all that makes sense. I'm probably rambling a little bit, but, you know, we need compassion and concern, but, you know, people also need to be accountable for their actions. And I don't mean to sound too harsh, but almost irregardless of their illness or their situation, that on some level, a person can stand up and say, help me. And even to branch out a little further, I'm such a proponent of mental health courts, drug courts, family courts, behavior courts, call them whatever you want. And I know that that's probably going to be a part of the recommendation you'll see coming out of Mark Bennett's Reform Commission I think it's due out in December, January for sure. But yes to everything you said, DA. And I'd also defer to Michelle, who is another expert in the room. And there may be others of you, and I'm just not seeing that right now. But those are my personal and professional views on the matter.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
I was just going to say, I appreciated you talking giving the example of the mother who didn't think her child was being impacted, even though he wasn't being abused physically, because I think a lot of people don't think about that. And, you know, having those conversations more broadly, that kids are being impacted, you know, and I think as mothers and fathers feel more impact when you think your kid's being impacted. So I really appreciated that connection, and that you were able to say that to the woman. That made a difference.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I also appreciated your reference to and knowledge of the adverse childhood events scale. So important. Yeah. And the more we can use that, you know, doctors and others, the better. So thank you for your awareness of that too, DA.
Well, you know, you surround yourself with people who are experts, and you learn from them, and that's how we all get better. One of the things that I've been working on, and it's still a long-term project of mine, you know, you talked about behavioral courts. That's a passion of mine. I think they're very effective when done the right way. You know, we have a drug court here in Shawnee County that's gone through some changes since I took over as the DA, and I think those have been positive changes, and I think it's going extremely well. But I would like to include behavioral courts. I would like to include something for domestic violence. I think that would be tremendous. I'd like to see something for people struggling with alcohol abuse. You know, I think these are issues that sometimes are so interconnected, it's almost impossible to just say, well, you know, for drug court is great, but unless you have a drug addiction, you're not going to get into drug court. So you're not going to get that same kind of treatment that we're talking about that's been proven to be effective. So long-term goal, I just need the courts to buy in. and board, but that's still a goal of mine. I'm confident we're going to get there.
Well, I think people who, like you, hold office in some of the bigger jurisdictions, the more populated jurisdictions, are going to have a real voice in that. And if, you know, I know that the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Subcommittee of the state's the Criminal Justice Reform Commission, I think those are going to be a big part of that. So Steve from down around Newton, Halstead area, and then Mark Bennett, I believe your counterpart in Sedgwick County. I can't speak for Mark, but I know that Stephen so far is supporting the inclusion of drug courts, that kind of thing in the recommendations. And particularly if we can, I don't know all the nuances, DA, but if we can get those in place, those drug courts, and get some of that jurisdiction in place for people that can have, if they meet those criteria, will not be charged with a crime. It'll come off their record. Is it pre-adjudication, or I don't understand all that exactly. Incentivizing that offender to go with the program and answer to that judge every week. You know, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, this has been done. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to speak for Mark either, but I can tell you most of the conversations he and I have had over the past few years have revolved around the need for additional resources to treat drug addiction and to treat mental illness, because those are the two biggest factors that we think are driving, driving people into the criminal justice system right now. And so the more we can do there, we're all on the same page there. It's just a question of how to implement that strategy. And to your other point, is it a pre-adjudication, post-adjudication? I think the best method is to have a hybrid model that allows for both, because you don't want to cut off the people that, maybe they've been struggling with it for a while. So they already have a record and they're not going to qualify for a pre-adjudication a model there. But at the same time, you want to have, the best available treatment, the best available options for anyone who's going to benefit from them, right? And so we don't have a hybrid program. Yeah, that's something we have proposed. That's something I'll continue to advocate for in all of these areas.
There's one other point I wanted to highlight too, is you talked about the substance abuse is not just necessarily with the offender, but also the person who's being victimized. And I know in youth evaluations, while I'm not saying we have a lot of domestic violence cases, but just in our youth evaluations, a lot of the kids that go through have a fairly high ACEs score. So it may not be violence, but it certainly could be.
Right.
And the other thing that I would like to add, because you were sharing some cases, and we all know some cases of people who's being abused. When is the man the one who is abused, and I know it's a smaller percentage, there is an extra layer to prove the abuse. Because even if they call police is gonna come and check the other way around first. And right. There are a lot of also cultural implications to even accept that. So I know we have to go with the highest percentage, but is there something specific when there's a case like that? Is there something, I don't know.
No, I think that's a great point that you raise. And I recall specifically a case where, a call was made to law enforcement responded, and right away they were focused on treating the guy as a suspect. But the guy had made the call, and in the call, he had made a complaint that he had been physically attacked. So it happens, right? It happens. And we also see these cases where, both parties are physically attacking each other, right? The law does not care whether the offender is a male or female and whether the victim is a male or female. The law does not care. But when, just like you said, when people are looking at a situation, and let's say, for example, if you have a big guy, he looks like he can take care of himself, and his partner is, a smaller woman. And if he calls and says, well, she was punching me or she was hitting me, how is law enforcement going to perceive that? How would the community perceive that situation? You know, is this really something that we want to pursue? Is this really, you know, so these are good points. These are interesting questions. You know, the law doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? These things don't happen in a vacuum. You have to consider the real world context and people's perspectives on it. So thank you for raising that. That's a great point.
Thank you.
So I have a question. I'm the social media person for our agency. I work for Pass to PCAR, and I'm interested to know, like, how can we use social media platforms to do everything, all the work that not only the DA is doing, but everyone else that's in our community towards this cause? So, like, what messaging do we need to implement and so on?
Yeah, great question. I think, especially around this issue, education is so important. And people, you know, maybe they know someone who's been a victim. Chances are they do, based on these numbers, right? Maybe someone in their family, someone they love, someone they care about. People just need to have access to going on. They need to be able to recognize domestic abuse, domestic violence when it's happening. It's not always, you know, somebody, you know, hauling off and punching someone across the face. You know, when you look at that wheel, there's so many other ways that happens. And so I think using our platforms to share that information and to promote that information, and also to let people know that, you know, there are resources. You don't have to wait until it escalates to a point where, you know, you're talking about a life or death situation.
Right.
A slide that I failed to highlight is 3 women a day in this country. 3 women a day are murdered by their domestic partner. Okay, so that's a terrifying number. That's happening today. 3 women are going to die because, you know. So anything we can do to bring awareness to it, and of course this is the best month to do it, I guess. But you know, we can do it all year round. So great question. I think. You know, in my experience, you know, I'm a lawyer. I'm an English major. I come out with this, you know, it's really dense material. And if you're not, you know, completely dedicated to the issue, you know, most people are just gonna, you know, I can't read that. So, you know, bullet points I think are effective. We can come up with some, you know, sharing the power and control wheel, things like that are helpful. And yeah,
I guess I was thinking maybe even of a series of where we take that wheel and break it down a little bit, you know, so it's not so dense, as you say, all at once, but kind of break it down into smaller memes or whatever, and then have, you know, the community read, because I think that's what we need to do to address this, because I work with, I volunteer with the YWCA with victims. So I think it's as much understanding what domestic violence is, because I think there's some things in that wheel that people wouldn't think of that as domestic violence necessarily, but helping them understand that it is.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And this illustrates perfectly why you're in charge of somebody's social media and I am not. I love that idea of breaking it out and, you know, piece by piece, and you know, we could even come up and well, you work with victims, so you have examples too, but we can help with examples of what that looks like. So that's great.
So I guess what I'd be interested in is there some kind of initiative we can do as a community to all be sharing the same level of messaging or the same type of messaging, so that we can present a united front to our community that this is a real issue and we're all on board together?
Yes. I am so glad you just said that. I would love to see sort of a, you know, the same way that we've responded to COVID within the community, you know, everyone kind of, for the most part, got on the same page, and you know, we all agree this is how you approach this problem and this is how you prevent it from spreading. Why can't we take that same kind of approach to something like domestic violence, which we know, you know, like I said, it permeates every segment of our community. Like anywhere you go, and you know, around here, no one's immune. There's no herd immunity vaccine that's come out and, keep people safe from domestic violence. That's us. We have to work together to do that. And so I would love to see kind of like a public health campaign treating it that way on domestic violence. So maybe that's something we can work towards.
Okay. I would personally love to do that, and I'd love to include, all the parties that are on this call today, because I think it's something that the more people that are involved in sending the same message, the better.
I agree.
And creating that sense of safe and support and connection.
Absolutely.
Good point. I think there's a behavioral health network or group developing through Heartland Healthy Neighborhoods, but I also wonder, Michelle and others there at PARS, if this might be an interesting notion to the Topeka Community Foundation. I think they're open to suggestions from time to health events and promotion, that kind of thing, and so just a thought there. And sure don't want to go on too long, but I might mention two things that are developing out there, and that's a thing called Stepping Up. It's a national initiative, and I know many of you have already heard of it. I kind of divide the counties into three areas, those that aren't engaged with it yet, those that are making progress and talking about it, and those that are already there. And I think Shawnee's probably in the middle. I know we're talking about it and what all that means, and we've put it out there to the commissioners, and then there are counties like Douglas and I think Johnson that are fully in, and I think that Stepping Up could include a range of things, and there's also a model called sequential intercept mapping that can be applied to a lot of different health and social and criminal justice frameworks. I think we're also looking at that under Mark Bennett's commission. Director Cole, Brian Cole, first introduced me to that model, I think it was about a year and a half ago. Some of us in the room may have been at that meeting. And so we're going to try to, I think we're going to hijack that particular model. It's pretty cool way of thinking about, how far upstream can we work? And then there's a specific program called PAARI, P-A-A-R-I. That's P-A-A-R-I. I think it stands for, and I've read a little bit about it and have suggested it to the Reform Commission, but it's, I believe it's called Police Assisted Addiction Referral Initiative. You can just Google P-A-A-R-I, it'll pop up there. And I think it's in fact, we're doing some stuff close to that now with Josh Clam's, TPD, CIT and co-responder program. It's kind of in that neighborhood of programs. But PAARI is a way to get the addicted person right to treatment from the first contact, often a law enforcement officer. So something to read about. There's a 4 or 5 page synopsis, no specifics for you all to think about. And DA, your comments made me think of those things. So thank you for that.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. We have a question from AJ Heyer, had to drop off for another meeting, but he says, if time allows, please speak to the impact that isolation due to COVID has had on the frequency and type of violence. Also, please speak to the pros and cons of reopening schools and businesses in regards to domestic violence. He said he'll catch the answer on the recording, and thanks for presenting this topic.
Okay. Well, I don't have specific numbers in front of me for, to be directly responsive to his question. I'm sure that our friends over at TPD would be able to provide some better numbers. The sense that I got in dealing with these cases as they come in is that we did have a spike, at least initially. And it's not really too surprising, because you're taking, you're compressing everything, right? The frustration that everyone feels with the situation, right? And well, now I can't go to work. Now I can't see my friends. I can't do this. I can't do that. Maybe I got laid off, So everything's going on, and now you're in this confined space because you're not allowed to go out and do other things. You're not allowed to go through your normal routine that allows you to decompress and all those things. So again, not a defense, not an excuse at all, but you can see how some of these factors play into an uptick in domestic violence. And in fact, we had some, first-time offenders through that process too. So people that, had never engaged in this kind of behavior before, and whether it was, through an employment issue, in conjunction with, the pandemic and the stay-at-home order and, all of that, the stress, the point where they did something that they regretted. So anecdotally, we've seen an increase. I don't have the specific numbers in front of me. And as far as the other question, going back to school, I don't know that my primary focus goes to domestic violence when I'm thinking about kids at home versus kids going to school. But it's part of it. It's kind of under the umbrellas and how we handle those actions. So the referrals that we get for a child who's been abused or neglected, those referrals have gone way down because a lot of those referrals come, from somebody in the school, from a teacher, a counselor in the school. And so that was my biggest concern. When kids are staying at home, if there's abuse going on there, we're not going to know about it. We're not going to hear about it because who's going to, is the parent going to contact law enforcement, and especially if there's a domestic violence problem in that home, exerting their dominance over the entire family. No, we're just not going to know about it. So I guess that's how domestic comes into play there. But in my experience, a kid going to school doesn't normally report, mommy is, or daddy's hurting mommy at night. Like that doesn't usually happen. It's usually the child shows up and they have bruises or they haven't eaten, in a day. And that's a red flag, and it goes from there.
I just want to thank you for all the comments that you've made today, and also the hard work that you're doing. It's not easy, it's not pleasant, but it's really needed. So anyway, I appreciate your hard work.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you everyone for the questions and for being here today and for listening. And I'm hopeful that we can, that we can work something, and whether it's one of the programs that Bill was to, I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to make some progress from this conversation. So thank you all.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining.